Welcome to Excel magic trick number 1552. Hey, in this video, we want to see an important calculation. Hey, we need to average the customer's last 3 sales. Well, the good news is there's lots of ways to do this. So we'll see how to do it with a worksheet formula, Power Query, and a DAX measure. For our worksheet formula, we'll see how to use AGGREGATE and the aggregate function. For Power Query, we'll see List.Average and List.FirstN. And in DAX, we'll see the amazing Calculate, Average, and TOPN. Here's the name of the file. You can download this to follow along in the link below the video. Our data set has date, time, then customer, then sales. So for each one of these customers, we somehow have to find the 3 latest dates, then pick out the numbers and create our average. The quick and easy way, of course, is to sort. Now, we're going to see how to sort by 2 columns in the Excel worksheet and also in Power Query, which will require that we do it differently than we do in Excel. Since our final major sort is going to be customer, if we're using the drop-downs, we have to start with date time, sort this newest to oldest. That way we have the biggest dates on top. Then we come as our second sort, this is the major sort, and sort A to Z on customer. Now notice when we use these drop-down arrows, 1, 2, the major sort was the second one. When we get over to Power Query, we'll see it's the opposite. But here we have what we want. There's the customer all together, and 1, 2, 3, those are the 3 latest dates that tell us we need these 3 numbers. If we were doing it the inefficient way, I would simply say, hey, average. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and enter. Now, that's the correct number. But of course, if we did any other analysis on this and we sorted, that would change. Well, if we're going to do it with a formula, we somehow need to pick out the 3rd biggest date for each one of the sales rep. Well, we have in 2016 or later max ifs, but that calculates the biggest. We also have the large function. This is perfect because we could put the whole dates and then k, and our k would be 3, and it would pick out the 3rd biggest date. But wait a second, we have a condition on this column before we can pick out the 3rd biggest, so we can't use large. Instead, there's this great function that first arrived in Excel 2010, aggregate. It'll actually let us do a conditional calculation on this customer column and then pick out something from the date column. Now look at this, the first argument, function name. Scroll down, there's what we want, large. So I type 14, comma. Now in the array argument right there, that's where we're going to have condition to pick out these. Well, there's going to be some errors in that when we filter out the values we don't want. So here's the perfect argument, 6. That means we'll ignore errors, comma. Here's the array. This is where we get to do our magic. Now we're trying to pick out just the correct dates for each one of the sales reps. So I put that in there. Notice that's table formula nomenclature, name of the table, and then in square brackets, the name of the field. Now we divide, and in parentheses, now we look at customer. And we say, hey, customer, how many of you are equal to, as a relative cell reference, the customer name? Now close parentheses. Watch how this works. When I click on array and hit the F9 key to evaluate, now we have just the date time values for that particular customer at the head of the row. The rest, divide by 0 errors. That's our filter. Control Z. Of course, the 6 will tell aggregate to ignore those errors. Now we comma. There's the cell with the 3 in, F4. Close parentheses. Control Enter to put the formula in the cell and keep the cell selected. Double click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. Verifying that the cell references are correct. Now we have our hurdle for each one of the sales rep. Now we use average ifs. The average range, well, we're trying to average the sales, comma, criteria range. The first one is for customer, comma, criteria. Well, there's a relative cell reference, comma, criteria range. That's the date, comma, and we want multiple dates that are greater than or equal to our hurdle. So in criteria 2, in double quotes, I have to say greater than or equal to in double quotes. I have to join that using the ampersand shift 7 to our hurdle date time. as a relative cell reference, close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. Come to the last cell and hit F2. They're all correct. Now we can do whatever we want. And they can be sorted. That one's not going to work, but these remain correct. Control Z. Now we use the aggregate function to get the third largest date based on a condition. And this function works in any version of Excel, Excel 2010 or later. If we want a method that will work in any version, then actually we can use the large. The difference is aggregate can do that array calculation without a special keystroke. Large, however, can do the same conditional calculation. I'm going to say, hey, I need to look through all the dates, but this time we're going to multiply in parentheses. Look at the customer column and say how many of you are equal to, as a relative cell reference, the particular customer, close parentheses. If I select array and hit F9 to evaluate, instead of divide by 0 error as the filter, here I get a bunch of zeros. Now large will just pick out the largest from GG. Control Z, all we have to do, comma, is put 3, and then F4 to lock it because we're copying it. Close parentheses. Now, whereas aggregate, we just hit Enter or Control Enter, this is an array calculation, just like we had up here using division. That array calculation just means, hey, instead of single items on either side of the operator, we have an array of items. But that array argument in large cannot make this calculation unless we do the special keystroke Control, Shift, and Enter. When we do Control, Shift, Enter, we're telling Excel, please calculate that formula as an array formula. Not only that, but you have to go up to the formula bar and verify that those curly brackets are put in. Those curly brackets are automatically put in, and they're Excel telling you that it made the calculation correctly. Now I can copy this down. If I go to the last cell, I can see those curly brackets are still there. Up here, F2, that is the array argument. And there are 5 functions in Excel out of the 450 that can make an array calculation without using that special Control, Shift, Enter. Now, guess what? F2. I'm using Office 365 Insider Edition, and there's a new Excel calculation engine in that version. This is May 2019, and right now, this calculation engine is only in Insider Edition. But later in the year, Microsoft says all of Office 365 will have this new calculation engine. And guess what? The new calc engine can understand regular calculations, array calculations. It's all just fine. I can simply use Control Enter or Enter. Notice no curly brackets, and it's calculating perfectly. Double click and send it down. Go to the last cell, no curly brackets, but it is calculating correctly. So large, whether you're in a version that requires Control, Shift, Enter or not, can be a substitute for the aggregate. Now I'm going to move this to the side. There's my move cursor. And now we want to see how to do this with Power Query. Our data set has already been converted to an Excel table, and it has a smart name. To bring this into the Power Query editor, we go to Data, Get and Transform from Table. This is the Power Query editor. There's our table. There's our query listed here. It's also listed over here. I'm going to rename this. That's the name of the Excel source table. I want to name the query something like average last 3 customer sales. Now, we're going to sort. And in Excel, we had to sort date and then customer because customer was the major sort. But over here in Power Query, it's the reverse. So I'm going to select customer, even though it's already sorted, and sort it A to Z. I want to very clearly see that step. Up in the formula bar, I can see the Power Query function Table.Sort. And there's a list within a list. That's the first sort, the major sort on customer. Now we come over and do our second column, and I want this descending. Over here, we can see there's still only one sorted row step. Up in the formula bar, we can see customer is first, but then there's a second sort, date time. Now over in the Excel worksheet, remember, we sorted date time and then customer second, and that was the major sort. Over here in the Power Query editor, we have to do that one first, date time second. Now we have the sort we want. And here in Power Query, when we want to make a particular calculation on these dates and these numbers based on a group, we use the Group By feature. So I select the customer column up to Group By in the Home Ribbon tab. It's also over in Transform right there, or we can right-click Group By. Now I want to show you what's going to happen, because the fact that we sorted before we do group by is very important. I'm going to eventually call this column average last 3 customer sales. And I'm going to group but show all the rows. This is internally what happens when we do group by. It gathers up all the records for the condition or criteria from the customer column. So it'll have one table with all the rows for Gigi, one for Tyrone, and the other sales rep. So I'm going to click OK. We see our new step. We get a unique list when we group by, and then some aggregate calculation, or in our case, a list of all the records. The key we want to see here is that, look at that, it's sorted. So for Gigi, we have a sorted list. And over here for Sue, we have a sorted list. And what do we want? We want the top 3. Now, I only did this step as a table just so you could see visually. I want to edit this group by step, so I'm going to click the gear icon. I'm going to leave that, but now I'm going to change the aggregate calculation to average. And I'm going to say, please average the sales column. Now, what this will do is it will average all of the records. And that's not what we want. But let's click OK. We still have one step over here. If I click the drop down in our Table.Group function, that's the previous step, that right there. Table.Group is acting on that previous step. The column that we're grouping by is customer. And then we have a list within a list, because we can have multiple aggregate calculations. Now watch this, List.Average sales. I'm simply going to come here. That sales column is referring to the entire column with all the sales. So we're going to use another Power Query function. This is M code, List.FirstN, open parentheses. And it will ask us, comma, what number of first rows? We're going to put 3. Now notice I'm hard coding this in. We absolutely could have brought that condition from the Excel sheet into Power Query and then reference that. But right now, let's see if this will work. When I hit Enter, there is our total. So we made an aggregate calculation, List.Average, but inside of that, we took only the top 3 sales because the previous row was sorted. That's going to work. Now I'm going to go up to Home, Close and Load 2. Where do we want to import the data? I want to import it as a table in the existing sheet. For the time being, I'm going to put it off to the side here. In M4, click OK. Now, if we want this to be linked, I'm going to move this, and I'm going to rename it Top Dates. Then I'm going to select one cell, Control-T, and Enter. Very importantly, I'm going to name this. I called it Number Latest Dates and Enter. Our formulas here are still using that 3. Now I want to bring this into Power Query. From Table, over here for Queries, I see that table. I want to right-click, drill down. We see Source, Change, and Top Dates. Actually, we don't need Change Dates. I can delete that. So we have our 2 steps. There's the 3. We can take this query name, Control-C, and we can use it. I have the last step selected. I click the drop-down. And instead of 3, I highlight. Control-V, and Enter. Close and load. Whoops, I made a mistake. That I wanted to close and load as a connection only. No problem. Right-click that sheet, delete. Click Delete. Now it's connection only. Now we can change this to 4. And when I hit Enter, well, of course, the formulas all update. Power Query, we have to right-click, refresh. And there we go. So we've connected the Power Query to whatever value we put here. Now I'm going to change this back to 3 and Enter. Right-click, refresh. Now let's see how to do this with DAX formulas. Now this is an Excel table. We go to the Power Pivot Ribbon tab. I want to bring this table in to the data model. So Add to the data model. This will allow us to make a pivot table, not a standard pivot table, but a data model pivot table. I'm going to pull the bottom up, expand sales, and down in the measure grid, I'm going to make a DAX measure. Type the name in the formula bar, colon, equal sign over here in Power Pivot. Over in Power BI Desktop, this works fine. Also, you'd use just an equal sign. And for the time being, I'm just going to use average, and then I'm going to select the column. Make sure you have table name and in square brackets the field name. In earlier versions, if you selected this, it would put just the field name. Please put the table name in because that's the correct convention. Close parentheses and Enter. Now, we can use this formula in the pivot table, but I definitely want to add number formatting. I'm going to click Pivot Table, Existing, click Collapse. I'm going to put this over to the side in P4, click OK, click OK. There's our F sales. I want to move it over to Active, right-click, Show in Active. There's our fields. There's our measure. When we drag customer down to rows, we get a unique list. We drag our measure down to values. That gives us the average for each one of the customers. Now, the way DAX formulas work, that's that average function. When GG sits in the row area, that's a condition or criteria, it flows into the formula. And internally, the DAX engine filters the fact table, just as we saw in Power Query when we grouped to get just the correct records. In DAX, it's done a slightly different way. Condition flows in. The whole fact table is filtered down to just the rows for GG. But that's not quite what we want. We don't want all 5 records. We want the top 3. And how do we change this filter context from all the records to the top 3? Well, the function in DAX that changes the filter context is the calculate function. Alt-Tab to jump back to the Power Pivot window. Right up here in the formula bar, we're going to change the filter context with C-Tab, the calculate function. Expression, that's the formula, comma, and the filter will change the filter context. We want top n. There's our DAX function. Top n value. So I'm going to hard code 3 in, comma. Table name, F sales tab. Order by F sales, and it's the date column, date time, comma, and then the order we want descending. Close parentheses on top n, close parentheses on calculate, and enter. Alt-Tab, and look at that. We totally have a pivot table that is respecting the top 3 customer sales. Now I want to import our top 3 hurdle into the data model. I'm going to click in this cell, add to the data model. There it is. Over to F sales. And the way we can access that number 3 over in number latest dates table, highlight, and we use the values function. Now, the values function can look at a column and give you a unique list. And if it has only one value, it will convert it from a column with a single value to a scalar value, that single number 3 that top n needs. So I'm going to type the name of the table, down arrow, there's the column top dates, close parentheses. So now in n value, values is just picking out the number 3. And later when we change it in Excel and refresh, everything will update. Enter. Back over to our pivot table. Now I'm going to move these using my move cursor. And now I'm going to change this to 4. And now I'm going to use the keyboard Control-Alt-F5 to refresh all. And sure enough, we get exactly the same values for each customer, the average of the last. Well, I shouldn't have put 3 there. I should have put n. And there we go. We get the average for each one of the customers for the last 4 sales. I'm going to change this back to 3. Enter. Control-Alt-F5. And now we have 3 different methods, Worksheet, Power Query, and DAX, giving us the last n sales for each customer. Now let's add some new records. I'm going to move this right below the table, and immediately they're incorporated into the table. Of course, the beauty of Excel Worksheet Formulas is that they update instantly. Now let's Control-Alt-F5. The DAX works perfect. But Power Query, what is going on? There is a bug in the Table.Sort function that causes some subsequent calculations to not work correctly. I had to email the smartest Power Query guy I know, Bill Sizes, and ask him what was going on. He said this is a well-known issue with Table.Sort, and there's a few ways to deal with it. Double-click the query. And the easiest way to deal with this bug is to insert a dummy step between sort rows and whatever the subsequent calculation is. This is a way of getting around the bug. So a step that people often do is simply go to index column. We're going to add an index column. Insert. There it is. By inserting that step, it will circumvent that bug. And so now I can close and load. If I remove these records, Control-Alt F5, we can see now the Power Query Table.Sort bug is circumvented. Now, inserting a dummy step is definitely the easiest way, but there's another way too. Double-click. We want to delete added index, delete, go to sorted rows. And if somehow I could just take that code and insert it into group rows, then I wouldn't run into this known Table.Sort bug. So watch this. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to copy all of this. Control-C. Notice Table.Sort is acting on the previous step. Now I'm going to delete this step. Group rows, formula bar. Group rows is properly acting on the previous step, change type. But right here is where we need to, inside of List.Average and List.FirstN, put our Table.Sort. Remember, that sales column is being pulled from that change type right there. So right before sales, I'm going to Control-V. This is not correct. We need to get rid of the first argument inside of Table.Sort. Now, the first argument of Table.Sort needs a table. Table.Group is grouping the records for each customer. And so for each row, we need to access that group table. Now, each is actually shorthand for a custom function. We have this huge formula here. And when we use an underscore, that's the argument for this each shorthand for custom function. So that underscore will get the entire set of grouped records. And this whole Table.Sort is actually a table. But what do we need? We need to look up the column. And in M code, you look up a column with your field access operator square brackets. So that formula will work. That's a little bit more complicated than inserting that step. Now, hopefully, Microsoft will fix this Table.Sort error soon. Now, when I click Close and Load and add these new records, formulas update. You got to love formulas. Control-Alt F5. And now everything is working. All right, that was a little fun with getting customers' last 3 sales and averaging using Excel Worksheet Formulas, Power Query M code, and Power Pivot or Power BI DAX. All right, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun. All right, we'll see you next video.